back to the Boropolis Podcast. As always, I am joined with Nathan, and unfortunately, this week's episode might be a little bit downbeat because for the first time in over a decade, Sunderland have managed to win a game against Middlesbrough. Nathan, before we get chatting about the football and all the other stuff we usually have a chat about on here, how was your week leading up to the game?
Yeah, all good from me. Again, yeah, as people know, in the swing of things with uni now. Although I do blur the background, I am back down here in Lincoln. People will be able to tell. But yeah, good week. What about yourself, Chris?
Yeah, same. Obviously, I think I said last week about how most of my time during January feels like I'm just checking various places on the internet to see if we're linked with anyone. But actually, it's been really quite quiet by January standards. And actually, again, unplanned, that gives us a nice little transition into just touching on some of the transfer news, or the one piece of transfer news, I guess, from this week. And that is that Middlesbrough supposedly, and this is from Alan Nixon of The Sun, who is pretty spot on with most AFL stuff. We supposedly want to sign Charlie Cresswell permanently from Leeds United. Of course, he's currently on loan at Millwall, and the rumoured fee is around £4 million. There hasn't really been any updates since, or any other sources for that matter reporting it, but supposedly he's a player that Michael Carrick would quite like to sign. So Nathan, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, of course, first hearing this news before the game against Sunderland. So my initial view was, well, if Darragh Lenihan and his injury was going to be severe, as we spoke about last week, then we may be looking at improving the central defence area. And Charlie Cresswell is a young player that I suppose Michael Carrick would quite like to work with. Fits into the recruitment model that we're trying to go with of young players that we're trying to develop and then probably more than likely sell on for a profit in the future. But yeah, an England under 21 international. Scored a few goals as well for Millwall from centre half this season, from set plays. But yeah, a young English international centre half. It looks promising. But of course, we have only heard a minor link so far, nothing too concrete in that front. So we'll just have to wait and see with that one, won't we, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, although it does fit the mold of what we are looking for, obviously buying slightly younger players and developing them. Initially, like you say, I guess we all kind of thought that the link was due to the fact that obviously Darragh Lenihan was going to be out for a lot longer than obviously it turns out he was. Of course, you can never believe social media, but I mean, there was the rumours of him being out for the season or months and months on end, and obviously that's not the case. So it made sense for me then, but obviously, given that we now know that Darragh Lenihan is back fit again, I'm not 100% sure if we actually need him. I mean, I guess Paddy McNair is again going to, and has obviously against Sunderland returned to his position on the bench, but then obviously we have a suspension issue now as well, so he's going to be back in the team for the Watford game more than likely. So yeah, it took me by surprise a little bit, I must admit, going into the window. I didn't foresee us making a move for a centre back, so yeah, I guess it's one to keep an eye on, but an interesting name and a new name nonetheless. So one of the downsides of there not being too much transfer news is that we can't put off the Sunderland game for much longer, Nathan. We have to address it. We have to talk about the results. And as we've mentioned already, we usually discuss team news first. Obviously, the one change was Darragh Lenihan coming back into the team, which was a shock to everyone, really, because Michael Carrick had said he hadn't trained all week. And played a little swift one on Sunderland and ourselves. And I mean, fantastic to see him back in. We all know the partnership that him and Dale Fry have developed. So it was a real boost prior to kick-off to see him on that lineup.
Yeah, it was. And as well as having Daryl Linehan in that side for his playing abilities, his leadership, as we spoke about last week, is very important to this Middlesbrough side. And yeah, it was good to see Daryl Linehan back in the side, especially with our central defenders being tasked with marking arguably the best centre forward in the division in Ross Stewart. So yeah, good to have Daryl Linehan back. Good to have him fit and ready. Glad that it wasn't a long-term injury, as we kind of thought it would be. I think Michael Carrick was a little bit coy on Daryl Linehan's availability in his pre-match press conference. So yeah, good to have Daryl Linehan back, especially with the situation that we are now in following the game as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, obviously, given that it was the one change, we go straight into things. And honestly, Nathan, from minute one, obviously we should add that you were in attendance, and obviously I watched the game on Sky. Unfortunately, there was quite a lot of fallout going on during the first half that you probably won't have been aware of until you come out of the stadium. And obviously we're referring to the fact that Sky Sports thought it was appropriate to put a current Sunderland player on co-coms for the first, what felt like the full of the first half. I think it ended up being around 25 minutes until they told him to go, pretty much. It was honestly embarrassing, to be honest, Nathan. I know you haven't heard it back or seen it, but I'm sure people listening may have heard. And for those that were maybe at the game and listening to this, it was pretty much the Middlesbrough match on the telly with an interview from Luke O'Nien and Don Goodman, who I always feel like doesn't give us the best of times anyway. Of course, ex-Sunderland player as well. They were just waxing lyrical about how good Sunderland were. They talked about Ross Stewart's ability on the golf course. They talked about Luke O'Nien's red card. And to be honest, it was just half an hour of nonsense waffling Sunderland propaganda, and it made me feel physically sick, to be honest. I really just still can't get my head around the decision as to why that seemed like a good idea. Maybe having him in the studio, or perhaps having him sort of contribute every few minutes or so may have been okay. But what turned out to be that first 25 minutes was just a shower. I mean, it wasn't really much better on the pitch, as we'll get on to, but it was, to put it nicely, it was just a shower of shit to listen to. And it riled everyone up, and rightfully so. I saw non-Middlesbrough fans getting wound up by it because it was that biased and one-sided. So yeah, I had to get that off my chest, because it was just unnecessary for a broadcaster like Sky Sports to do that. I just thought it was pathetic, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that for a broadcaster like Sky, it is their aim to, well, put teams on Sky that have quite high audiences, and obviously they're looking to cater to Championship fans as well. With Sunderland being in that division, they do bring in a big audience, but I think even Sunderland fans will have been a bit, well, not really that interested to listen to a 25-minute long-form interview with Luke O'Nien whilst their game was going on. I think that when you want to watch the game, you want to hear what people that are said experts in that field are talking about when it comes to what's going on the pitch, and give you something that perhaps you as a fan haven't seen what's going on. So to have Luke O'Nien talking about Ross Stewart's ability on a golf course whilst a game between two sides that are fighting at the top of the Championship to try and get promoted into the Premier League, two sides that have quality bedded throughout both squads, and to hear them talking about stuff like that it's a bit poor, really, and it probably shouldn't be the case, especially with the amount of money people are paying to watch Sky every week. So yeah, a bit poor from Sky Sports on that front, but I was pretty glad to be stood in the cold at the Stadium of Light in the gods, not having to listen to that lad waffle on about Sunderland and his experiences there, crying on Netflix.
Yeah, crying on Netflix. Maybe they should have brought that up in the interview and it might have changed the tone of things. But anyway, I just had to get that off my chest. Obviously, we'll talk about the game. And as I said, I mean, the first half commentary wasn't actually much better than the first half performance. For me, I feel like we never really started from minute one. There was obviously a chance late in the first half for Marcus Forss where he works Patterson. But overall, we just couldn't really get into any form of rhythm, any sort of rotations of the ball. The way that we've come to expect Middlesbrough to play under Michael Carrick it almost felt like it was a new manager that had come in and hadn't had all these positive results and hadn't had the time to work with players. It's just, they didn't really see much of any sort of, I don't want to say plan, because I think that's probably a little bit too harsh, but certainly we just weren't at our best. And I don't know if it was the atmosphere or it was the occasion that got the better of some of the players. I don't know. It's just they didn't really look themselves for me first half.
I think that the stark contrast for me in that first half was both teams' attacking intent. I think if you looked at ours, we attacked quite slowly in spells. It was a bit more laboured going forward, and we were reluctant to throw a few bodies forward. Whereas you looked at Sunderland, and when they attacked, they threw numbers forward very quickly. They attacked with pace, and that is pretty much the key takeaway from this game. And I think where we struggled throughout the game was pace. Sunderland's quartet up front with Stewart, Roberts, Clark and Amad Diallo is littered with pace throughout that front line. And when they attacked, they got forward quickly, looked to get at fullbacks and defenders, and they did so by playing some neat one-touch passing around our defenders and midfield. And I think it's fair to say that they had the better chances in that first half. Of course, Ross Stewart had one goal that was disallowed for offside. He had another chance that came from the right-hand side. A ball came in, and for me, he should score. He gets ahead of, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Dale Fry in this instance. Got ahead of Dale Fry and fired a shot over the crossbar. I think he has to score that, if I'm honest. And then there was one just at the end of that first half as well, where a big long ball sort of bounces in Stewart's favour and he gets a shot off and it's saved by Stefan. But before those Stewart shots as well, Boro nearly the architects of their own downfall away from home in the first 10 minutes. Zach Stefan, of course, wants to play out from the back. I think in this instance, he does actually try to go a bit further on and tries to knock a lofted ball into midfield, but he doesn't kick it right. He miskicks it and it falls straight to Diallo, and he pretty much has a free shot on goal from 18 yards. His touch sets him well, and he has a left-footed shot, and I thought, for the life of me, this is going in, and it's going to be probably the first instance this season where Zach Stefan's ball-playing ability has actually cost us. We've had a few worries with it throughout the season where there's been a few scary moments, but I thought, if there's ever going to be a moment for this to happen, it can't happen now. Please don't happen now. And for Middlesbrough, it was lucky as Diallo fired wide, but yeah, it's fair to say that Sunderland had the better of things in that first half in terms of chances. I was hoping that going into the second half, of course, we'd kept things at 0-0. I was hoping that we'd just keep things a little bit tight in the early stages, look to grow into the game in the second half and gain a few chances ourselves. But of course, within 3 minutes of the second half starting, the game pretty much turned right in Sunderland's favour and, well, pretty much turned the result in Sunderland's favour as well, didn't it, Chris?
Yeah, it did. It did. And just a touch to rewind a little bit, just to touch on Zach Steffen. I know it almost feels like once every sort of month we have to talk about him and sort of say, well, trust the process type of thing. But as you say, I think that was really probably the closest we've come where his ball playing sweeper keeper act has sort of really nearly cost us. I mean, we've been close before, but that was the most glaringly obvious one. And I think the only thing I'd say is I saw a lot of criticism of him again yesterday. And like I've said before, I think if you look at the goals that we've scored from moves where he allows a centre forward to come and press him and then clips it into midfield and starts a move off over the course of the season, I completely admit I'm one of the ones that is moaning and groaning when things go wrong. But if you take yourself out of it, I think truthfully, he's crucial to the way we play. And when he does draw 2 or 3 men out of a shape and then picks out a midfielder and we then have an overload on either side of the pitch or centrally, it's really effective. So it is just a case of looking at it as in, I guess, weighing skills, what you gain from what you lose. And I think in fairness to Zach Steffen, like you say, he made a good save from Ross Stewart. He's made some crucial saves and he's also made some mistakes and decisions where you kind of think, I'm really not too sure about that. But yeah, on a whole, I think still any shouts to let go of Zach Steffen, which I mean, I think we all know is not going to happen. And any shouts to sort of have Liam Roberts come in is just, it's a no from me pretty much. But yeah, onto the goal, Nathan. Of course, that man Patrick Roberts is involved. Finally decides that all of this ability that he's had over the years, and which in fairness he showed in very small glimpses in a Middlesbrough shirt, he was finally going to put it to good use. Clips a ball over the top of our defence on the half volley, I think it is actually. And Stewart runs through and he's got the legs on Dale Fry. He's got that long frame, long strides, hasn't he? Ross Stewart. And the initial contact from Fry starts well outside the box, doesn't it? I'm sure you've seen this back, and obviously you can give your opinion on it, Nathan. But the contact starts outside the box. Now, in this instance, for me, it's a red card. There's not loads of contact where it's obvious that he's pulling Stewart back, but there's enough contact that it stopped Stewart running through. For me, where the mistake has come here is that actually the foul starts way before the box. And actually, by the time that Stewart decides to launch himself towards the box, his foot is just touching the white line of the 18-yard box anyway. So to give a penalty, obviously, it was a red card. There was no intention to play the ball. But I'm really not sure it's actually in the box or even on the line, really.
Well, I think what I would say is that both players are obviously running alongside each other. Dale Fry perhaps a little bit behind Ross Stewart in this instance. Dale Fry's got his arm across the chest area and then arm of Stewart. But he, from what I see, lets go of Stewart just outside that 18-yard 18-yard box. I think red card, yes. Penalty, no. But what the referee may have guessed or seen, because I think there was a slight delay between the referee and the assistant giving this, is it in the box or not? And they've opted to give it as yes. But what I would say to you, Chris, about yes, the foul has started outside the box, but the ruling is if a defender starts holding an attacker outside the penalty area and continues holding inside the area, the referee must award a penalty kick. So they've seen it as he's continued holding him into the box, although the replay shows that he let go by the time he's entered. So red card, I think so. Penalty, they're fortunate to get it. But
I think as you say, when you watch it back, and obviously we're fortunate and obviously I'm sure the officials will have watched it back as well. But in terms of when I've said the foul starts outside the box, obviously it does. But like you also mentioned, I don't think the foul continues to the point where Stewart actually has his foot on the line.
Yeah.
So for me, obviously it's all hindsight and it's happened now, but I'm not sure the foul continues up until the point which would then allow the referee to give a penalty.
I think it's kind of soft anyway. Dale Fry's.
There's not a lot of contact, is there?
There's not a lot. He's got his arm across him a little bit to try and sort of nudge him off his stride slightly, just to try and put him off. Steffen's coming out as well. I think it is fortunate a little bit for Sunderland, but yeah, we haven't had the rub of the green with that one possibly. But yeah, Dale Fry received his marching orders. Sunderland have a penalty pretty much immediately into the second half. Of course, Stewart steps up and Zach Steffen goes the right way, saves the penalty into that top corner. And it's unfortunate in a sense that Steffen palms it back into the 6-yard area rather than away from goal. And Stewart's there to tap it in from 3 yards out. Boro made a change straight after Matt Crooks left the pitch. Paddy McNair came on. We went 4 at the back, 4 in midfield, and Tuber up front by himself. But for me, we were always going to struggle from then on. Sunderland are a side that are clever enough to know that they were 1-0 up. All they really had to do was bide the time a little bit, keep the ball, tire us out, and see the game out. And they did just that.
Yeah. Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I know we've obviously spoken about the penalty incident, and I've stuck up for Zach Steffen. So it would be ridiculous for me to then say something on the complete opposite end of the scale. But just to play devil's advocate, because I had seen some criticisms. Firstly, do you think that he hesitates too much for the actual incident in terms of coming out and trying to gather the ball from Ross Stewart? And secondly, do you think that actually the penalty's at quite a nice height for him, and if he is going to save it, that you sort of expect him to parry it wide? Now, I have my own opinion on this, and I think he dives early, and the fact that he's so far over one side means his body position sort of doesn't allow him to push it out. Now, it'd just be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, because that I've seen some of the criticism with that incident, as well as the distribution conversation.
Yeah, I think in the question regarding him coming for the ball over the top from Roberts and Stewart bearing down on goal, I think once Roberts plays that pass, if Steffen is to come then, can you imagine the backlash?
Yeah.
he comes for that. Stewart knocks it round him or under him. Steffen's pretty much stood 30 yards out from his goal, and you don't know, like, he's going to face massive backlash there. I think that Stewart has a lot to do as well, whilst he is running through on goal with Dale Fry alongside him. I do think he has a lot to do in terms of he has to get in front of Dale Fry, get control of the ball, see where Steffen is, and then get his shot off. I mean, to be fair, he doesn't see where Steffen is or get his shot off. He just gets into the box and jumps on the floor. But yeah, I think that perhaps if one of Stewart's touches looked a bit more appealing for Steffen to come out and sort of make himself known, then perhaps. But after the initial ball, certainly not, because I think the ball is fantastic from Roberts, really. He sort of got that sidewinder volley technique perfect, really, with a lot of backspin on the ball as well, that just sits nicely straight into the path of Stewart. I don't think he could have asked for a better passing behind, if I'm honest, which is nice to see from Patrick Roberts. Of course, we won't forget that goal against Reading, but other moments were a bit iffy. But anyway, and regarding Steffen's penalty save, I think you're right, Chris, if I'm honest. I think that he's dived either too early or his momentum that has took him to that side has sort of took him ahead of the ball, and he hasn't been able to sort of spring and push the ball wide. Instead, he's caught himself ahead of the ball, and he's just sort of made the save, and the ball's ricocheted back into the path of Stewart. So yeah, I'd agree with you in that sense, Chris. I think that is what's happened. But yeah, a moment in the game that has probably decided the game, really. A big talking point. I thought whilst I was in the ground that it was nailed on, that it was a penalty, but upon seeing the replays, I think, yeah, perhaps not. But yeah, as I say, Boro made a change, Crooks off, McNair on, sort of just to fill in our shape again, but this time down to 10 men. And I think that we did our best for a long spell of the game under pressure in various moments of that second half. I think that we did do well. There was a lot of discontent in the away end in that second half, because for some reason a few of the fans thought that this team wasn't trying. No, they were trying their hearts out. They're down to 10 men away from home at a rival club that are good in possession of the ball, have attacking players that are dangerous, and that on their day can seriously harm any team in the division. And if we sort of step out of our shape and start trying to press with 10 men, they'll zip the ball round us and we'll get beat 4-5-0 away from home in the rivalry. So I'd just like to get that one off my chest a little bit, because we needed to sit in our shape in that second half. We had 40 minutes with 10 men and 1-0 down, and the game could have quite comfortably got away from us. But instead, I felt that we had a few chances in that second half. We picked our moments to get forward. Riley McGree had an effort that I thought for the life of me was going in.
Off the post.
It just trickled wide, didn't it? And I thought that one on another day creeps in, gets you a point. There was a few other chances. Hayden Hackney had a shot that was over the bar. Tommy Smith had an effort deflected. But yeah, it was unfortunate that the game was perhaps spoiled a little bit by a red card. Yeah. I felt that Cameron Archer coming on, you could see that he's got a lot of pace. Of course, he was put on in a position probably a bit a bit different to where he'd usually like to be. He was off the right in this instance, quite in a similar position really to what Marcus Forss has been fulfilling for Middlesbrough in the past few weeks. But you could tell that he's dangerous with his pace, 100%. It poses the question, if you'd like to change things up, you could go with Cameron Archer down the middle and try and slide balls down the side for him. I think he beats most defenders for pace, if I'm honest, from what I've seen there. He looks very comfortable in his stride. But yeah, we'll have to see with that one. But of course, a few missed chances for Boro were sort of made to pay with a second goal for Sunderland. Ahmed Diallo, good work between him and Patrick Roberts. Diallo fakes to go down the line, comes back inside, hits a shot in the near post with his left foot. And that was all she wrote, really. I don't want to dwell on that second Sunderland goal too much, because 10 men chasing the game. We'd been running around with 10 men for nearly half an hour, and it must have been painful being out there running around after that ball for 10 men. And also, I don't really care about Sunderland either. So, yeah, Boro fall to a 2-0 defeat at the Stadium of Light. Results this weekend mean that we have dropped 2 places in the Championship table, still in the playoffs, still above Sunderland, despite defeat. And we've got one game next that is the last game of the big 3 that I've talked about in the podcast for the last few games. Before we get on to that, I want to bring up a few talking points from the game and from Middlesbrough's performance in the game. Just going through a few sort of members of the team, possibly, and also a wider problem. So I'll start with a wider problem, which I felt, as I said earlier on in the podcast, cost us yesterday a little bit, and screams that it is a problem, and that is the lack of pace. And I think that sort of fits the mould throughout the full squad. If you want to look at the defence, the midfield and the forward line, we haven't got players really with explosive pace. I think Archer and Jones, both being used off the bench, are effective to a point. I mean, we've seen limited game time for Archer since he's arrived. I'm sure we will see starts coming soon, but giving him 10 minutes in games where we're sort of holding on, as we did against Millwall, and against Sunderland and Brighton when we're chasing the game, pretty pointless, really. He's not going to be able to make that much of an impact in those games. And on Isaiah Jones as well. We didn't touch on him in the lineups earlier on, but Isaiah Jones was back in the 18, which is good to see. Of course, when Isaiah Jones is at his brilliant best, his pace is a fantastic attribute to have, but we haven't been seeing him take on defenders in a number of months in a Middlesbrough shirt. So taking those two out of the equation, otherwise, I think that we really are struggling for that bit of explosive pace in this team. If you look at our front quartet yesterday, Matt Crooks, pace isn't his strong suit. Riley McGree finds himself in situations where he could perhaps be one-on-one with a fullback, and you'd hope that an attacking midfielder would like to take them up the line and beat them for pace and put a cross into the box, but that's not Riley McGree's game. Marcus Forss got a little bit of pace about him, not explosive enough. He looks a bit unorthodox on that right-hand side. He's not doing anything that's coming natural to him off that right, is he? he throws in the odd step over, but you usually know that he's going right and
Yeah.
to try and put a ball into the box. And Tuba does have a little bit of pace about him, has a bit of strength about him. I thought yesterday he did pretty well in terms of the moments where he did get on the ball. He did look to take us forward a little bit. But in our forward line, compared to Sunderland's, especially yesterday, pace was a massive, massive problem. And I'd just like to get your take on it, Chris, both in the forward line and defensively, when you look at Dale Fry chasing alongside Ross Stewart, who I think you'd say Ross Stewart he's not like tremendously quick, but of course he has got that big frame that helps him get longer strides. Would you say that we are really struggling for pace in this Middlesbrough side?
Yeah, I think just quickly on the Ross Stewart sort of anatomy, I guess. He's almost got that similar build to Gyökeres at Coventry, where he's not rapidly or deathly quick. He almost seems to have those long strides where, and I think Gyökeres is quicker than Stewart, to be honest. But yeah, it's those long strides and the height and sort of build of the player which allows them to just take. I mean, very similar situations actually under different management. The situation where Stewart goes through yesterday and the situation where Gyökeres actually scores against us at the Rico earlier on this season, they're actually fairly similar situations. But on our side, in terms of pace, I think you spot on. I think although it's been very successful, and I don't want this to seem like reactionary because we've lost to Sunderland, so we need to change everything, because I don't actually think that's the case. But I do think that you are right in that we don't really have that natural just burst of pace. And for me, I look at our wingers and think, you look at Marcus Force and he's effective. I think that's the best word to describe him. Certainly recently, he's got assists and goals, but he looks unorthodox. He doesn't really look comfortable there. And I know that you were speaking to some Brentford fans on the way back yesterday, and when you told them that he'd been playing off the right, they were almost sort of dumbfounded that could actually happen, because everyone knows, I suppose EFL fans know his skill set. It's not to get by a man and deliver balls into the box, but like, I guess Christian Stawani, he sort of found a role inside of a setup that managed to get goals and assists out of him. But yeah, even off the left, you look at McGree and he picks up really good positions. That's one of his strong suits, that he does pick up some really, really nice positions. But often, like you say, he's not able to sort of get away from a defender or really go himself. I often find it, if he breaks away on the left, he almost slows down as he approaches the 18-yard box to allow Ryan Giles to bomb on, and sort of, it's almost not an over-reliance, because obviously Ryan Giles' delivery is fantastic 9 times out of 10. So I guess that's a pattern of play. They probably work on the overlap and letting Giles go around him. But I do think that if I was Michael Carrick looking at yesterday, it just felt a little bit clunky. We didn't really have any sort of rhythm going forward, and it sounds silly because of how positive the results have been, but I always sort of felt in the back of my mind that it was a little bit of a worry, where it always felt a little bit makeshift, having Crooks up top and having Chuba. That position that he currently holds is perfect for him. He can drop deep, he can get on the end of crosses. It's that position is perfect, and I actually think it works really well for McGree as well, the formation. But I think we could just do with another option in terms of a natural winger that can play right or left, that is just, as we've said, someone that is going to stand a fullback up and say, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to get to the byline, I'm going to deliver quality into the box. And obviously we would like to look at Isaiah Jones and think that that is him, but obviously we've mentioned that he's going through a real rough patch, to be honest. And obviously a positive to see him back in the squad, but he certainly. We're going to have to be careful in terms of throwing him back in, and then potentially the same scenario happening where he isn't in form and he's just, his confidence drains. So, yes, I think in terms of pace, you mentioned defensively as well, we don't really have a lot of pace, but that wouldn't be my major concern. It would be more in terms of an attacking fluidity that I think we could do with someone comfortable playing off the left or right and giving us that real width, to be honest. So, yeah, I think you mentioning Cameron Archer as well. For me, yesterday, he showed he's probably ready to go from the start now. We didn't bring Cameron Archer in as someone that's going to get cameos half of the championship, probably even more. Well, after Cameron Archer's signature as a goal scorer, someone that causes havoc in behind with his pace and knows where the back of the net is. And for me, I think it's only right that he gets that chance now. And Crooks has had his real positive moments. Birmingham away, he was phenomenal. But I just thought yesterday, as I say, it looked a little bit clunky. It looked not really. I guess Sunderland probably made it look worse than what it is because they're quite blessed in terms of their forward line is very dynamic and quick. With that technical ability added to it as well. So yeah, I completely agree with you, Nathan. And just touching on, I guess it's on a similar note. We asked for Twitter questions after the game yesterday, and two that stood out, which I felt were quite similar, really, was Joseph Scott, who asked, should we have changed the way we played to go more direct in order to beat Sunderland's press? And also Matty, Sir Smoggy, his Twitter handle is, and he said, why was it so easy for Sunderland to play the way they did? No challenge at all, really. And he wasn't happy with the performance, to summarise, really. And I think you sort of touched on it there. I don't think it was a case of players not trying. I think that's really too easy and a ridiculous statement, to be totally honest. But what's your take on the way we lined up? I know I sort of touched on it earlier, but we did almost. I guess we are the away side, and goals haven't really been a problem for us. But I did feel like we sort of just sat back a little bit and almost let them do what they were good at.
I think that, as I said, going forward, we looked a little bit laboured. It looked a little bit slow. It looked at times that we were reluctant to play through the lines a little bit. I remember particularly in the first half, McGree picking up a few pockets on our right-hand side. In one instance, I think we ended up getting out a corner out of it in the end, but it took a few attempts from the midfield, which in this sort of instance, it was Hayden Hackney being reluctant to play the ball in between two Sunderland players, to pick out Riley McGree in acres of space, really. And had he done that, McGree would have been on the half turn and we'd have been in down their right-hand side. So I think that we struggled to be direct with our attacking ability, and defensively, I think that the way we set up offensively with Giles bombing on left us open a little bit down Sunderland's right-hand side, which is where a lot of their attacks came from. I think anyone would have expected that, really. You saw Amad Diallo, who has the free role yesterday for Sunderland, picking up a lot of space on that right-hand side, picking up the ball deep and playing neat 1-2s with the right back, Tri-Hume, and Patrick Roberts on that right-hand side. So, yeah, we struggled in that instance, but I just want to bring up a final little point on the pace that you just spoke about there, Chris. But this is about the defensive shape that we've been setting up with under Carrick, and I think the lesser sides that we've came up against in the last few weeks have struggled in a way to work this one out. But the better sides, the Blackburns and the Sunderlands, have exploited us with this. And that is a big long ball over the top of the two centre halves. And we're dead and buried pretty much because our two centre halves aren't that quick, really. We saw it with Blackburn's goal at Ewood Park. Perhaps if Daryl Lenihan stepped up in that instance to try and play Ryan Hedges offside. But in this instance, a long ball over the top, Stewart's in behind. I think what I'm trying to get at is, do you think that our centre halves perhaps push up too high and leave us open a little bit too much, especially with concerns from fans? Because I don't think Michael Carrick's concerned, but I think that fans are concerned that Stefan should not be playing that sweeper keeper role and flying round all over the place 30 yards out from his goal. So do you think that the defensive line's perhaps too high in instances where we are trying to press? Because the goal yesterday for Sunderland, the penalty incident for Sunderland in that first instance yesterday didn't come from Sunderland playing that neat passing around us that they were carving us open with in that first half. It came from a big long ball down the middle, as I've just said. So what do you think about that, Chris? Do you think that the defensive line is perhaps a little bit too high in this shape?
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at it, and when you think of our backline, we're not blessed with pace. Giles, although he's a little bit probably more dynamic than anyone else in our back four, a lot of the time he's actually one of those players where, quite strangely, he's quicker when he has the ball at his feet rather than in terms of just sprinting.
Yeah.
And I guess one point that obviously seems to have kind of been forgotten about is the fact that we've been without Anthony Dijksteel. And I think Tommy Smith sort of made that right back spot his own. But I guess in terms of having Dijksteel, we would usually have a little bit extra recovery pace. So I guess that's one slight alteration that could happen if this becomes more of a common theme. But in terms of our line being too high, our defensive line, we've been punished by it twice. But I guess it's almost oppositional, where a lot of the time in the Championship, you're not really going to come up against a striker of Ross Stewart's running prowess and finishing ability. And I mentioned Gyökeres, and I know Hedges isn't really a natural striker, but somewhat a willing runner that's going to make that run. But I don't think particularly that we play at a high line and allow Stefan to sort of sweep up. I think it's something that Michael Carrick will probably keep an eye on, but I don't look at us and think we play too high and we're inviting that long punt in behind and runners on beyond. I think it was very personal yesterday in the fact that it was just Ross Stewart running on a very... And I think, in fairness, I think it's a great ball by Patrick Roberts. As you said, he's got that sidewinder absolutely spot on. And once it's over Fry's head, it's a foot race. And we all know Dale Fry, he's brilliant at a lot of things, but sprinting is not really one of his gold stars. So, yeah, I don't think it's a huge concern, but obviously I'm sure Michael Carrick and his coaching staff will make sure that, that isn't being exploited week in, week out, because there is pacey forwards in this division. But yeah, I don't think it's something that I'd be too concerned about. I'd on a whole, I'd look at our performance yesterday and think the biggest concern for me was the fluidity of the attack, really, and the fact that it was pretty non-existent yesterday.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Chris. You look at their fluidity up front. They had the 4 players, well, particularly the 3 in behind, interchanging with each other quite a lot. And again, the directness of all 3 of them really was a massive threat all day. And I think that should we have a winger which is Isaiah Jones on red hot form, then we'd be waxing lyrical the same as they do about Amad Diallo, because I think if you look at their sort of similarities in dribbling and directness, they are quite similar in that sense. I think Diallo's got a little bit more technical ability to his game, and that's why he's found himself at Manchester United than Jones. But I think should we have a red hot Isaiah Jones in this Middlesbrough side off that right hand side, then it's another string to the bow in terms of the Middlesbrough attack. But yeah, I think that's enough chat on Sunderland and that game for another season, as much as we hope it is. We do not want to jinx anything on this podcast, but there you go. So the next game, Watford at home at the Riverside. Watford are in 3rd in the table, 2 points above Middlesbrough in the division. Of course, similar to us, have changed manager. Surprisingly, haven't changed manager since Slaven Bilic took over in September. But there you go. In the last game, drew 1-1 at home to Rotherham. But I think what needs to be taken from this particularly is Watford are going through a massive injury crisis. If you look at the side that started against us in August, I think it was August, September time earlier on in the season under Chris Wilder, their team was pretty much sorted really to look for automatic promotion early on in the season as well. They'd beaten Sheffield United, they'd beaten Burnley, and they were looking to me like that they were ready to mount an automatic promotion charge. They look like they've fallen just a little bit short. I think the top 2 are away and gone now. But the injury to João Pedro certainly won't have helped that. I think that in the return fixture, João Pedro cemented his status as the best player in the division for me. I thought he was absolutely outstanding, top class. And at the time, he was being linked to Newcastle for £30 million. And I mean, I was hoping that they signed him before that game, but they didn't. And since then, he signed a new deal at Watford until 2028. So God help us if he's still knocking about in the Championship in next season, if we're still around. But yeah, injuries for Watford have left them a little bit light in terms of options, but they are using a lot of younger players in the last few games, and they've picked up a few points, but struggling to pick up massively good form, really. So I think this one, with us being the home team, with us looking to bounce back from defeat in our last game, I think this is the perfect fixture for us to go into, really. I'd rather play this fixture than a team down the bottom where we're almost expected to win. I think that this fixture is two sides that are probably similar levels in terms of the team and, well, certainly in terms of the table. If we win this game, we go into third, especially, well,
depending on
going third, and that's because a lot of teams are missing championship action next week because they're in the FA Cup fourth round. So I think I'm buzzing that we're in the championship on Saturday so that we don't have that backlog of fixtures later on in the season. I think that's ideal for us, and hopefully we can get a result in front of our home crowd and bounce back from that defeat against Sunderland. So what are your initial thoughts on this one, Chris? Do you think that Middlesbrough have a good chance of bouncing back?
Yeah, like you've mentioned, I think one of the major things really that you sort of look at straight away with Watford is, are Sarr and Pedro fit? And luckily for us, João Pedro's not. I'm not 100% sure on Sarr, because I know that he's even struggled this season a little bit with injuries, but Pedro is definitely set to miss the game. And I mean, that is the major positive, isn't it? As you say, undoubtedly one of, if not the best player in the championship. So yeah, I think just in terms of obviously a Slaven Bilic team, you know, we saw with his West Brom teams where it almost felt like they were never quite where they were meant to be in terms of West Brom. They never sort of had that settled team and settled automatic promotion chasing lineup. And obviously Slaven Bilic knows the division. He got West Brom promoted, didn't he? Of course. But yeah, I think Watford just look a few players short, really. Obviously, they may bring players in this week. And it's a game, to be honest, that, like you've already mentioned, I think suits us more so than perhaps going and playing someone near the bottom of the division, where we can bounce back and sort of almost, as long as the result's positive, the Sunderland game almost immediately becomes forgotten about. And I quite like the fact that, to be honest, as I said, you know, we were out the cup, convincingly beat by Brighton. I like that we can just concentrate on the league. That is our main priority. We're never going to win the FA Cup. I know people will say, well, what about our fantastic memories last year? Well, we had them last year, so we can go a year without them. But yeah, concentration on the league, concentration on bouncing back. And it won't be an easy game, but I do think that we have enough in the locker to go and cause those Watford defenders problems. And for me, one thing that I'm just hoping for is that Cameron Archer gets his first start in the Middlesbrough shirt.
Yeah, I think that is something that Sunday brought, especially to the fore in terms of a talking point. I think that his pace in behind defences could be key for us, should we be able to unlock that. We've seen clips and highlights, and we saw it in the flesh as well. His ability last year for Preston. And I think that it's probably time to start Cameron Archer. I think that Matt Crooks has been decent in a role that he's probably a little bit uncomfortable with for the last few weeks. Of course, Birmingham away, he proved the doubters wrong in that second half and got 2 goals in a minute. And I think that now we have to start Cameron Archer and see what he's all about. It'd be great for Cameron Archer to get that first start in a Middlesbrough shirt and to get to get a goal that wins us the game and gets us 3 points. That would be ideal. But you won't be at the game on Saturday, Chris. So do you fancy explaining to everyone why that is the case?
Yeah. So we haven't mentioned it. Obviously, it's been sort of in the planning for a while. We haven't mentioned it up until, of course, the podcast before I go away. I'm actually going traveling, Nathan. I'm going to Bali for a month. Don't worry though, the podcast is still going to be getting uploaded. The time difference is going to be interesting to say the least for me. But Nathan, we felt like we should mention it really, just because quite consistently, obviously, this podcast being uploaded on a Monday night for as long as I can remember, really. Following obviously a game on a Saturday. Usually, the last few weeks we've been quite fortunate in the fact that we've been able to record on a Sunday, whereas prior, obviously, my decision to go travelling, I'd been working on a Sunday, so even earlier on in the season, the podcast was going up a little bit later in the week. But I think even from last season, we always sort of wanted it to be Monday night at the latest. So for the next month, at the moment, it's only a month. It could be longer. It may well even be less. I don't think it will be. Hopefully, it doesn't go that badly. But yeah, I'll be watching the games from Bali. Of course, I'll be tuning in to iFollow, whichever way I can. But yes, it was just more of a case to say, be patient if we are maybe it's a day or two late, and obviously the accommodation that I'm staying in actually is suited to people that are working remotely, and it's got super fast Wi-Fi. So I hope that's not a complete lie in the fact that we won't be able to get any connection at all. But yeah, so I've been told the Wi-Fi shouldn't really be too much of an issue. So I'm sure we can work around it. We'll find our way. We've done the Boropolis podcast with you abroad before. Okay, I'll probably be a little bit further away in the world, but I'm sure we'll make something work. But yes, obviously I won't be at the game. I'm really, really quite upset because obviously it's a huge game, isn't it, in terms of league standings. But yes, I'll try my best to hopefully actually maybe even watch the game during the flight, because I think you can get Wi-Fi on flights these days, to be honest, Nathan.
Possibly, if it's a big flight, which I'm guessing it probably will be going over to that end of the world. So perhaps, if not, I'm sure that you'll be connecting to whatever Wi-Fi that you can get when you land, and finding out what the score was or what's going on in the game if it's corresponding to your flight. But yeah, safe travels, Chris, and we'll be back for another one next week, won't we?
Yeah, we certainly will. And I just want to emphasize, we're not going anywhere. The Twitter, obviously, a lot of people probably know Boropolis for transfer updates really on Twitter. That won't be going anywhere. Me and Nathan, 24 hours a day, probably more so. You'll get actually more access because I'll be up God knows what time. So if there is another Martin Piero type saga, I'll be covering. Obviously, Nathan will be as well. So yeah, that should be interesting. Deadline day. It could be an all-nighter for me. But yeah, I'm excited. Obviously disappointed that I'll be missing a few games. But yeah, I'll be taking Boro tops and representing over in Bali. So you don't need to worry about that. And of course, the podcast is never going to stop just for a little bit of traveling, even if it's on the other side of the world. But yeah, that's do you know what, Nathan? Somewhat more of an upbeat podcast than I kind of expected when we started, because I thought it was all going to be doom and gloom. And it is a little bit, because obviously the result was not what we hoped for. But I think a derby defeat where you remain above Sunderland in the table and also remain in the playoffs is a lot better than getting beat off Sunderland and looking over your shoulder and thinking, God, we could still go down here. So So yeah, I have enjoyed it, to be honest, and we've gone in depth. But apart from that, Nathan, unless there's anything else that you want to touch on, I think that's us for another week.
Congratulations, Sunderland fans, on your derby that's not a derby, that might be a derby win. Hope you don't get another one for another decade or so. We'll see you all next time.
Yes, we will. That has been another episode of the Boropolis Podcast. Please do leave kind reviews. But yeah, please do like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching us that way, and on audio platforms, obviously. Same as always, please do leave us a kind review. Even give us 5 stars if you're feeling really generous. But yes, from me, Nathan, thank you ever so much for watching and listening, as always. And we will see you again soon.